We have with us Amit Jain, Managing Director of Engie India, the arm of the French multinational, and an active player in India's renewable space. Um, Mr. Jain, welcome to Business Standard. And to start with, could you please give us the latest update of, we're almost towards the end of this year, calendar year. Um, where is Engie India going? What exactly have you accomplished by the end of this year? And how
Sure.
is the progress post the pandemic?
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Thank you for having me, Mr. Dinkar. I think from our side at Engie India, I think today in India we have a portfolio of about 1.1 gigawatt of operational assets on solar side and about 250 megawatt of wind assets. So a portfolio of about 1.3, 1.4 gigawatt roughly. Um, Last year or this year we won a project in a juvenile tender, which is a 400 megawatt tender. We were awarded 200 megawatt plus a 200 megawatt green shoe option. So that was a recent win. During the pandemic, we commissioned a 200 megawatt, again, a juvenile solar park tender that was commissioned in 2021, August, through the pandemic. So I think that's our portfolio. We are present in about 7 states across 17 different sites. We were one of the first project, in fact, was commissioned in 2014, way back in the GNM environment scheme. And I think the idea, it's been a long journey for us. We've seen the whole renewable space evolve. We have started off with a 5 megawatt project. Today we are doing 400 megawatts. So that's the change in scale that we've seen over the past years that we've been in India, indeed.
You how I believe that the world's biggest solar park for NG globally is in India. Is that right, or am I mistaken?
Correct. Yes, yes, indeed. So the 350 megawatt park, which is a 350 megawatt peak plant in Kadapa in Andhra Pradesh, that's one of the largest for NG globally at one location. So I think we're doing some larger plants right now under construction in the US and in Brazil, but I think that's today stands to be the largest, one of the largest at least that is in the commissioned already. Indeed. So solar for us, at least within NG, I think India is one of the key markets for solar projects. I think globally as well. It's one of the top 4 or 5 markets in which our solar presence is there. So in India, as I said, we have about 1.1 gigawatt operational plus the 400 megawatt. So that gives us about 1.5. So that's one of the top 4 or 5 markets for NG for solar globally, in fact. So we have a lot of.
What's your global portfolio? What's
So the
the
global
size of your
portfolio. So the global portfolio is divided. We have 34 gigawatt operational at the end of 2021. By this year, we'll have about 38 gigawatt. This includes hydro, which is the biggest chunk, about 17 gigawatt. The rest on the wind and solar side, it's about 12 gigawatt of wind and about 4 gigawatt of solar. And our target is to grow this portfolio by 4 gigawatt every year until 2025, and then 6 gigawatt till 2030, giving us a total installed capacity of renewables about 80 gigawatt by the end of 2030. So that's the portfolio that we have today globally.
And where exactly is India in terms of your global target? How would you categorize the Indian targets?
So I think India today. I think in terms of global targets, I think about the 4 gigawatt commission capacity that we have. So to be honest, we don't have a specific target for India. I think India is one of those markets where it is somewhere where we look at it from a growth perspective. So even though we've been around for quite a while, our portfolio is about 1 gigawatt odd, right? But the idea is to grow it now. So what we are a long-term utility player, right? So we're looking at projects where we can add value. We're not a financial investor. So today the 400 megawatt that we have today is significant for the group as well that we recently won. But the idea is to see how we can add value. So we don't give specific targets to any country. It's more on a basis of we look at the global target, and whichever market offers us the returns that we target, we kind of focus more on those markets, right? So I think India, what NG has done over the last year, we went through a reorganization. We've kind of reduced our country footprint from about 70 odd countries in which we were present end of last year to now only 30 countries. So, and India is one of them. So the idea is to focus or refocus our strategy to a limited number of geographies and then build on those geographies as well going forward.
No, but just to interrupt Mr. Jain, I'm sure you'll have some kind of India plans the next 3 years going forward in terms of capacity plans or investment plans, right? I mean,
Yeah, so I think by 2025 we are looking at commissioning about 1 to 1.5 gigawatt of capacity, right? That's the target in the short term by 2025. That's the commission
but
capacity.
solar and wind, or
Yes, solar and then wind. Wind not so much, but more solar focused because wind of course has its own challenges given the current environment. But primary focus on solar, and then of course hybrid projects or projects with storage. So those kind of projects as well that we're looking at for sure, because we're doing a lot of stuff outside such projects outside India. But in India, I mean, the market is still evolving. So we're looking at all these different technologies as well.
I'm sorry, you mentioned about challenges in the wind space. What kind of challenges you see there?
So I think the challenges are, I think we see the tariffs are significantly higher. So the discoms at the moment are not kind of, looking at signing off the PSAs or, procuring power at such high tariffs. I think that's one challenge. Of course, the supply chain issues are there globally. It has been there because of the lockdowns in China, and also the whole global supply chain with the energy prices and the cost of turbines and everything, right? So the economics are not working for the India market. I think globally, to be honest, we are doing more wind today development than solar, and we don't see that challenge in other geographies because it's not a price-driven market, so to say. So I think from that perspective, for instance, in Egypt, right now we currently are doing a 500 megawatt project in Egypt that we recently kind of kicked off, which we are getting the turbines. But I think it's more when the price becomes a driver, it becomes a more challenge to meet the tariffs that we have here in India.
So you're able to meet the solar tariffs, but you find wind is a challenge.
Yes, I think wind. I think there has been a pressure on the wind.
Solar has a cost inflation, right? Solar also is having there's this BCD duty
Yes.
of India, and then you have this other what do you call it, the ALMM that you need
Sure.
to buy so that also adds up to some cost. So I'm just wondering, despite all this, you find wind to be pricier? I mean, is that?
Yeah, because I think there are limited manufacturers of wind turbines in the world, in fact, right? I think that's the challenge. I think there are a few companies. I think they're all struggling in terms of their financials as well. I think if you see the top wind guys, I mean, everybody is kind of refocusing their strategy, right? So the top 3 or 4 that are there globally. I think on the solar side, we've seen tariffs also increase. I think it went down to as low as 199 recently.
Yes.
In the recent past, but now we've seen those correct to 250, 260, 270 ranges. So I think, but the market is still absorbing, or the discoms are still absorbing that kind of price increase on the solar side. But the wind tariffs are north of 3 rupees that we saw in the recent bid. So I think that's the challenge. I think the delta between the tariffs that we're getting for solar versus what we're getting for wind from a discom perspective becomes a challenge. Of course, the discoms don't look at the intermittency of the wind versus solar and the PLF. So that's why I think what will happen over time and what we see is that the hybrid projects will become more popular, right? Because I think if you look at it from a pooled perspective, it makes sense for the discom and for the developer both to kind of have a weighted average of PLF versus a good tariff as well.
Also, it depends on the states, right? Like Rajasthan is big for solar, Tamil Nadu for wind. So you can't have too much solar in Tamil Nadu. I mean, that also makes a difference.
Yes, but what's happening is I think the government and some of the tenders have not forced or not made it mandatory to have co-located plants. So you could have a wind plant in Tamil Nadu and a solar plant in Rajasthan, and then that could be a hybrid project, right? So that both wield the power to one discom. So I think that works out pretty well because it doesn't make sense to have co-located. You're right. There are limited sites or limited states where we can have co-located wind and solar. I mean, it's along Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, those kind of states. But I think if the co-location is not mandatory, I think it could make sense.
As of the end of this year, I think India would be kind of 35% short of the solar target of 175 gigawatts. I believe about 120 may come up. That's kind of the plan. And I'm told that key issues, I mean, financing is not an issue, of course. Technology, while not homegrown, is imported. But I believe land and transmission grids are a big problem, um, especially
So
these two. Is that right? Or
So maybe first on the target itself, I think if you remember what the government had kind of laid out, it was basically on the solar side, it was about 175, as you said, but 40 gigawatt of that was rooftop. Huh? I think that's where the gap is, to be honest. I think
yes,
I think the rooftop is not picked up the way it should have. I think, for various reasons, with the net metering, with the states not being, forthcoming in terms of net metering and all those kind of policy matters. I think so. I think that's where the gap is. To be honest, on the solar side, I think the country is done well in terms of meeting its target. I think on the solar is the only bucket that will meet its target. In fact, in compared to rooftop solar or even wind for that matter. I think so. I think that's there. But yes, there are challenges, of course. I mean, but the challenges, I think the government is cognizant of those challenges, right? I think to making it easier for land acquisition from the transmission side as well with the new GNA regulations. I think making transmission, more accessible to genuine players. I think rather than people that were just necessarily in the past hoarding on transmission by acquiring land and getting connectivity without any projects. So I think those kind of so government is cognizant. I mean, our interaction with the government has been quite positive over the past year or so. I think to understand these challenges and take action on those. I think with the new Electricity Act as well. I think it's all in the right direction, so to say. So I think on the solar side, to be honest, it's been less of a challenge that we see than on the probably the rooftop or the other or the wind side. Maybe wind side, it's probably more of a challenge on the land side. But I think that also, I think the government is looking at how to maybe upscale the land, because land on the wind, if it's like kind of the high resource lands have some of the older turbines, low capacity turbines. So I think there is a plan to see how we can upgrade those turbines or increase the capacity of those turbines. So we're actually utilizing the land to the fullest potential, because the turbine capacities have increased significantly from maybe, a few kilowatts to now megawatt scale turbines, right? 4 megawatt turbines that are there. So I think that's the change that will come. And we're seeing that in other geographies as well.
where do you see offshore wind? That's the big thing in the UK, in Europe, and I mean, it is supposed to be the really next big thing. Whereas I believe 4 gigawatts of tender is ongoing, if I'm right, and in Tamil
I
Nadu.
think I think they've released the document for stakeholder consultation now. I think that's where I think yesterday was the last day to submit our queries, which we have. So I think we have a JV called Ocean Winds with EDPR, a Spanish company.
Spanish company, right? Yeah.
So yeah, it's a 50-50 JV called Ocean Winds that does the offshore wind business for us. So yeah, so I think we are looking at India as a market, but I think it's under evaluation, right? What kind of model will come up? Will it be seabed lease? What the transmission risks are? So I think it has to be looked at in totality, right? I mean, I think offshore, even though it could be the next big thing, but the development pipe that you need or development time that you need for offshore is about 5 to 6 years before we see CODs of those projects, right? So it has to be done in an environment. I think the government has done a good job in terms of giving its plan in terms of that 4 gigawatt this year, then another 4 gigawatt next year, so that helps companies like us plan the investments into the infrastructure that goes with offshore wind, because the port infrastructure, the infrastructure to kind of have the turbines available on site or to transport such large turbines, because the offshore wind turbines are significantly larger. So the whole infrastructure and the allied manufacturing of those equipments becomes a big challenge, and it can only be done when there's a long-term plan. So I think it could be there, but I think I think right now, I think the government is planning to do seabed leases, and then we'll see, and they have to see how it goes, because to be honest, the wind speeds in India are not so high as we see in other geographies in Europe or in the US, even the offshore wind speeds. So I think if again, it's a question of economics, and if the tariff is the driver, then it'll be a challenge to kind of, meet those low tariff expectations with offshore wind as well. That
But
we're
you
getting
need so you would need viability gap funding, because capex is quite high in offshore wind, right? The government should
yes,
provide
indeed.
some from upfront financing or some incentives.
Yeah, I think the government was looking at that at one point in time. What we understand in the recent document, at least that was issued on Tamil Nadu, they were talking about only seabed lease, and then there was no talk about viability gap funding at that point. So I think it's a different model, right? So in the US and more mature markets, we see seabed leases where you do your own development, you find your own customers, you find your own PPAs, maybe corporate customers or discoms, and then you kind of sell the power there. So I think that's the route that the government is taking, because I think the viability gap funding discussion was pending for quite a while between states and the center as to who will bear the cost and everything. So I don't think that model has kicked off yet, even though, I mean, it would make sense, at least in the short term, to help like they did in solar and wind in the initial days, indeed.
Engie is quite a leader in corporate PPAs overseas.
Yes.
In India, have you had any traction on that? I mean, in terms of a more complex arrangement, I don't mean like a solar,
Sure.
small scale solar, building a park and then just, giving some power, but something more, across the value chain, like incorporating other renewables like batteries or hydrogen or something like that. Have you looked at that?
No, you're completely right. I think, we don't target that market that you said about, right? Simply setting up a small solar plant, and, we wouldn't be competitive. I think, we don't have the USP. Our USP is to provide an end-to-end solution to a client where we can, offer a variety of services that NG has to offer in terms of, technology, know-how, trying to meet the demand as to what the demand is, looking at it from an energy efficiency perspective, looking at from that perspective, a holistic solution for a client. So in fact, I think we have not been in the past focusing on this market, because the market, as you know, was driven by, just setting up a solar plant and just, supplying power from there. So that is not our business. So what we do globally today, NG is one of the largest, if not the largest corporate PPA IPP that is there globally. We do about 2 gigawatt of corporate PPAs. But I think at the same time, India has had this kind of learning curve. Now we are seeing more and more demand from such clients, such as, the big data center, the big tech companies, the big manufacturing companies, the big steel companies, to provide that solution that we talked about, right? The end-to-end solution with different technologies, different ways of, profiling of energy, and that's what we are focusing on today. So we're doing a lot of pre-development work. We're in discussions with some of the large corporate clients through our global and local relationships. We do already work with most of them of the RE100 globally. So we are in touch with them, and we're seeing how we can utilize the whole landscape, which is kind of evolving as well, because again, with the new open access regulations, it's making it more easier for clients to draw power, even for the small facilities. So we are seeing how we can leverage on that and enter this space. So definitely a plan for the future for us.
Where do you see floating solar going?
Floating solar, again, I think
in Europe, new technologies are coming up. You have panels that track the sun and all. I read recently in Holland. So where do you see India? It's still pretty much non-existent, right? In that sense, I mean, NTPC is doing some floating solar and their own, but otherwise you don't see much commercially.
Indeed, I think floating. I mean, there has been talks about significant the capacity of India in terms of floating is quite significant, given that but the challenge again comes down to, I think, commercials, right? I think the cost of selling power from a floating solar park versus selling power from a land-based solar farm, it's much different, and I think that's where the gap is, right? I think today, India has.
Would it be double the tariffs, or what kind of?
Not double, probably 20-30% higher, I would see. But I think again, it's again on the supply chain of the floaters, because floaters are, kind of very costly to kind of transport. So you have to have manufacturing at the site or locally present to ensure that we're not transporting basically the floaters, which are lightweight material. So I think that's where the challenge is. I think, in other parts of the world, what we see is land is a constraint. India today, land is not a constraint, given the wastelands that we have in Rajasthan and Gujarat. So I think till that is available, I think floating will still be on a back burner. There will be some one-off tenders, like we talked about the NTPC tenders. There was the Rihan Dam tender. The MP state came up with a tender recently. So I think those kind of tenders will be there, but I think it's still take time to kind of move to main scale or mainstream in terms of a technology, from a technology perspective.
How much has Engie spent on India since you started in 2014?
Well, I think. Well, I think it's a tough one, because we have invested and divested assets, so it's been a kind of a churn. I mean, we did about 800 million euros worth of capacity, kind of exposure we had to India before we sold down our stake in some of our operating assets to Edelweiss about 2 years ago. Now we have again about 300 odd million on our balance sheet in terms of investment, and then with the new projects it'll increase. So I think that's been the scale of how we are investing. So I think we have invested up to about 800 million in the past, and now we have divested a bit, and now we are again on the investment path again.
And what do you foresee? I mean, next few years, any country-wise investment plans, or how much do you think in your future tenders you'll end up spending? I mean, you'll have some
So
idea.
as I said, the target is about 1 to 2 gigawatt that we have to commission by 2025. So if you just do the math, it's about, again, it's about another 5 to 600 million euros of investment that we see till 2025. So I think that would be quite significant in terms of what kind of investment we do in the market.
Is green hydrogen a hype at the moment? I mean, not really viable commercially. A lot of talk.
Yeah, I think everybody talks about that. A lot of announcements on green hydrogen. In fact, globally, we are doing about 70 pilots on hydrogen with different small customers. So, but we think it's still a bit far away in the future, right? I think 2030 is what the pundits are saying, that it will be more commercially viable. But I think, again, in India, I think the government is moving in the right direction. They're mandating use of hydrogen by industries, because that's the missing link. It's easy to produce green hydrogen. Set up an electrolyzer, set up a renewable farm, and you can produce green hydrogen. But the whole supply chain to ensure that the industries use it, I think that's where the missing link is. And I think the government is kind of coming up with policies to ensure that happens, because if that happens, then you're creating the demand. And once the demand is created, automatically the supply kind of gets created, right? And I think India is a good market to kind of make things at a large scale cheaper, right? I think we can be the number one, hydrogen producer in terms of cost, in terms of lowest cost in that sense. So I think once the demand is created and once there's mandate to have that demand, I think we can definitely grow bigger. But I think it's still some time away, to be honest, at least from India story perspective. But there's always, these small one-off projects that are coming up on a regular basis. But I think it's still some time away.
What about your net zero targets as a company?
So we are targeting to be net zero carbon by 2045. That's the target that we set up. We have shut down significant thermal assets in the region. So some of them we've repurposed. For instance, in India, we don't have any carbon emitting any plants, so it's only renewables. But for instance, in Australia, we recently decommissioned a large 1 gigawatt asset, but we repurposed the land to use it for battery storage. So we're doing those kind of investments. We're doing carbon capture. So we're using the learnings, because the grid connectivity is there. So we're using those facilities to kind of look at how we can repurpose them with renewables, with battery storage, or the new technology that's coming in. So I think we are decommissioning, and most of the capacities are being decommissioned or in the process of being decommissioned.
Anything concrete on battery storage and CCS in India? In fact, Niti Aayog has just released a paper on carbon capture. Anything concrete, or for Engie it is still kind of like an exploration as far as India goes?
Again, it's an exploration phase. Again, I think we wait for the market to mature. I think it's still in early days in India. I think the government again is setting up policies like on standalone battery. I think there was a tender issued by SECI last few months ago, and there was response, but again the tariffs were significantly high, right? And I think it's a challenge, because in other markets we see that the storage of standalone battery storage is kind of has different revenue streams, right? So with negative pricing, with grid support, with different kind of revenue streams, not only just peak shifting that the government came up with. So I think those kind of innovations we need to do in the business model to make it viable both for the IPP and for the discoms, or to kind of get revenues from those investments. So then we can get a lower price, at the same time give the returns to the IPPs or the private sector to invest in those sectors. So I think that's where I think we need to kind of be waiting to kind of government to come up with those policies so that we can then go in and target those markets. But definitely, these verticals are in our radar always, and as and when the market is ready and we think the market is ready for us to invest, we will definitely go ahead.
Just finally, I just want to know, you said it's among the top 5 markets for Engie in the renewable space, India.
Solar
Sorry, the solar space. The solar space. I mean, you mean by 25, 26, you see it being kind of upgraded among the top 3, top 2 markets, or given given
No,
the
it'd be
solar
similar.
potential?
I
You know,
think
the
it'd be
5
similar. I think
is quite huge,
yeah, it'd be
which
similar.
the
I think it'll be similar. I think India offers a lot of scale, yes, but at the same time, I think, you see a lot of projects not coming up for whatever reason, right? Because of the challenges that you mentioned. I think we are very selective in the projects that we choose where we can add value, right? So we want to hold on to our assets for 25 years, so we're not a financial investor. So our differentiating factor is that we want to hold on to our projects for 25 years, even though we divest a stake, but we don't divest 100% unless we want to exit the country necessarily. So I think from that perspective, we are very selective in the projects where we can add value. Same on CNI that you asked, right? I think we want to do complex projects which are technically challenging, projects where we can, add value, and we can, hold on, and we can deliver on the tariffs and the returns that are mutually beneficial to both the discom and ourselves. So I think that's where we see. So I think India remains as a market where we have to choose on what projects we do, right? We will not necessarily bid for every tender that comes up. I mean, there will be tenders on solar space, for instance, 10, 15 gigawatt we see every year. We don't bid for everything. We're very selective on the off-takers that we choose. We're very selective given our experience in the market. We kind of pick and choose where we want to focus on. And that's how we kind of built our strategy around India.
How are you finance your solar? I mean, basically in India, how are you financing that? Is it debt equity, internal accruals? What kind of or any green financing? I mean, what are you pursuing?
We're doing project financing and then refinancing after COD. So it's a simple project finance, non-recourse. Yeah, and the equity comes in from overseas. So that's how we kind of structure our projects. We in a last project which we commissioned recently, we used foreign multilaterals, foreign banks. That was the first time we used them because that time it was making sense. But usually we go with Indian lenders or NBFCs that are there in our portfolio.
What kind of ratio you have the debt equity ratios typically for these solar projects?
Debt equity is standard. It's standard in the market. I think somewhere ranging from 25 to 30% equity to debt and the balanced debt. So I think 25 to 30% equity and then balanced debt.
Are banks comfortable?
Yes, I think. Yes, I think so. I think again, I mean, we choose the off takers, we choose the kind of projects we're doing. Engie has a good reputation. I think most of our operational projects are performing well. So I think the banks take a lot of comfort on that. I think again we're not, as I said, we don't flip our projects necessarily, to kind of, we're not in the market for short-term duration. So given that we are a long-term player in the market, I think the lenders are comfortable with Engie in terms of what projects we choose and what projects we bid for.
Should the government classify it under priority sector lending, as some people say that renewables, if it does, then there'll be a big thrust and a big push. Is that?
Indeed, I think that's one of the things. I think even the tender documents. I think if it makes the risk profile more balanced. I think we've been telling the government to do that. I think if we can make the risk profile more balanced, some of the risks that we price in as an IPP that we see in different markets. If that becomes shared. If the tariffs could go even lower, and then we can achieve even lower tariffs. Right? In the Middle East, we see tariffs of 1 cent, right? 1 cent. As in India, we see 2 or 3 cents. So that's because it's dollar denominated tariffs linked to the dollar. Interest rates are passed through. Interest rate changes are passed through. So I think. Look, I mean, it's all a function of how much risk the discoms or the country is willing to take versus what the IPP is willing to take, and either it's priced into the tariffs or not. I think so. It's a function of risk versus pricing it in. We are more conservative, so I think we price all these factors in our tariffs. And that's why our ambitions for India are not necessarily we will bid at crazy tariffs just to get megawatts. I think that's not the business that we are in. We want to do business which is sustainable, which we can grow incrementally our portfolio and do good and deliver good projects for the lenders and for ourselves as well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, and thanks for your time, Mr. Jain.
Thank you, Mr. Dinakar. Thanks.